Great. I am going to go ahead and start. Good afternoon. Happy New Year. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Just a quick introduction. My name is Tanya Finan. I serve as the VP of Education for the HIMSS Arizona Chapter. I do hope that your 2022 is off to a good start. So today's, this is our first webinar of the year, so super excited to have all of you join us. We have some amazing information to share with you today on medical device security and Parkland Health's journey and awareness to secure medical security devices on the why, how, and benefits of the challenges. So we're super excited to have our speakers today, Bruce, Matt, and Travis, and I will introduce them here shortly. Before we get started, for our featured sponsors today, we have Pivot Point Consulting and AP Professionals. So we're very thankful for their sponsorship that allows us to bring information to our community and continue to keep best practices within the Arizona chapter and bring information to our members. So HIMSS is a global advisor and thought leader supporting the transformation of health ecosystem through information technology. And we're super excited to be a part of this community and share all of these best practices in health IT. Just a few announcements to make to remind our members and community of some of the events that we have coming up. So May 5th, 2022, we have behavioral health keynote speaker and panel, which would be a live event. So please make sure that you're checking out our website for further details on that and registration opportunities. The other thing we just launched this year, we were super excited about, is our new portal platform, which allows our members to introduce themselves for networking opportunities, highlight things that people are focusing on within your health systems across the board, share cool stuff, hiring, job search information, and or just getting to know you. So please make sure that you check that out and reach out to the community for that. So our vision is to realize the full health potential of every human everywhere, and then our mission to reform the global health ecosystem through the power of information and technology. Oops. So just a few reminders here. Everybody is on mute, so we are going to let our presenters present their information. If you do have any questions, you can type them in the chat box. We are recording this webinar today, so it will be available through our website and with a link to our YouTube channel, which will you can view this at any point in time. Again, another reminder is that if you are joining us today, you are qualified for CE credits for CP HIMSS and CA HIMSS. So please log on to the HIMSS website to claim those credits accordingly. So I'm going to give a brief introduction of our speakers today. So we have Bruce McDaniels. He serves as the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Parkland Health in Dallas, Texas. He has extensive technology leadership experience in multiple industries such as energy, manufacturing, entertainment, and healthcare. We have Travis Kobernick. He's the Director of Clinical Engineering for Parkland Health. He has led the clinical engineering for a decade, driving the use of integration of leading technology to improve efficiency and processes. And then we also have Matt Dimino, who will be sharing his information or sharing his screen to lead the discussion with Travis and Bruce, and he is the Executive Vice President of Advisory Services for Operational Technology at First Health. I will go ahead and now turn it over to Matt. If you, I will stop sharing now and you can share your screen. Thank you all for joining.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, we should be all set here. So to set the stage a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about the threat landscape. What brings us here? Why are we having this conversation? In healthcare, it's a significant challenge. And what we for years, we've had an inability to understand and profile what we have in our environment. And so the threat landscape has drastically increased. The amount of threat agents has drastically increased. And so the need and really for safety in the environment of care, there's been a need to address the kind of safety concerns within our organizations. And so from a high level threat landscape perspective is we have a majority of our providers are between 100 and 500 patient beds. Obviously, there are numerous organizations that have many more beds than this, but you'll realize that from a scalable perspective when I talk some of these other bullets here that these organizations have an estimated 10,000 to 100,000 network connected devices. And that's everything in between managed devices, unmanaged devices, OT, IoT, IOMT, all the acronyms that are associated with that. So a majority of these facilities have nearly 100,000 devices. On average, a hospital has about 10 to 12 connected or network connected medical devices. So anywhere from about 2 to 6,000 when we look at this 500 patient beds kind of numbers here of network connected medical devices on the wire. Of those, an average of 6.2 vulnerabilities per medical device. And I think we'll highlight and share some of that information and why we're having this conversation today because of some of the vulnerabilities and intel and insight that's publicized that we're learning more about and some of the tools that are helping provide some guidance and insight around these vulnerabilities. So to continue on here, 164 cyber threats detected per 1,000 connected medical devices. So the fact that, researchers and others, 0 days, everything in between are finding that there are threats associated with our connected devices in our healthcare facilities. And there are numerous stories around how many blocks and how many threats are blocked on an hour, on a minute per basis of many of these organizations. And holistically right now from a overall standpoint within the healthcare industry in the US, we're talking about 120 network connected medical devices and clinical assets in our healthcare delivery organization. So every kind of clinic, imaging center, hospital, any healthcare delivery organization will fall into this and having those network connected medical devices. Now, about 60% of all medical devices are unpatchable. And we'll kind of highlight and discuss a lot of reasons why and what pertains to that here in a moment. Many of these devices that we're talking about, these connected devices on our networks, have weak and default passwords. They have outdated operating systems, and they're inherently insecure and out of box setup. So a vendor, a technician, whomever will bring these assets into your organization and again, inherently just open them up, turn them on, and connect them however they see fit to make it conducive to the environment and get it up and into clinical operations. So medical device security, why? I think we've all been experiencing this from the standpoint of breaches and security incidents and ransomware. And what we're seeing is the growth in yearly breaches, from 500 records and greater is drastically increasing. I mean, in 2020 alone, about 640 within our healthcare organizations. And we're seeing a pretty significant growth in cybersecurity spend. And some of that spend is on all the different tools, the different approaches, the different people, process, and technology that we want to embed into our facilities and put into practice and place within our facilities. And so the growth in spending alone is going to continue to grow. And I have some more numbers here in a moment referencing specifically healthcare. The increase in security losses is obviously drastically increasing as well, and the losses overall, holistically from the U.S. and worldwide perspective, is we're nearly 1% of the world's GDP when it comes to security losses. At almost $1 trillion in 2020 alone in cybersecurity event losses. Now, these losses are everything in between from ransomware to the remediation and cleanup, and I think that's where there's a huge factor to this is. Some of us will accept the ransomware, we'll pay the ransom, we'll do the elements that are required to compensate for our breaches or to pay the penalties and the fines, but we tend to negate or forget about the massive amount of costs that are associated with getting back on your feet. What is it we need to remediate? What kind of elements? Who do we have to involve? There's numerous parties involved in trying to remediate these breaches in order to just make sure that you're set and you're back in business. And that doesn't even account for and reflect the reputational damage that a lot of these incidents and breaches come to within your healthcare organizations when it hits news media and what your patients and customers and clients are viewing your organization, especially when you're in a competitive market for healthcare. So we'll continue on with the why. It's pretty clear. It's evident that hacking and IT incidents are drastically increasing, and this is specific to healthcare. So this 429, there's literal hacking incidents that we've been able to track, been identified as associated with breaches within our healthcare delivery organizations. And the numbers here to the right show that obviously healthcare is willing to spend more money on cybersecurity. So alone from 2017 to 2021, healthcare industry spent about $65 billion on cybersecurity. Again, whether it's people, the process, and the technology, service providers, things like that. So that element, that's going to continue to grow. And it has to, because as we look at these other two bullets here, these other two elements, is our IoT or IOMT markets are going to continually drastically increasing, becoming first to market with wearables, becoming, and getting in healthcare facilities with new technologies that make it easier, more seamless for our healthcare providers, is where a lot of marketing and these devices are targeted. And the issue is they may not have the secure SecDevOps incorporated, right? They may not have those security elements embedded into those practices. So we're seeing a lot more, medical devices as software as medical devices, different elements to this coming into our organization. Even I mentioned wearables, but gaming systems, these kinds of AR and VR and things like that are in our environment, to help with our patients and staff are security risks. And then here our healthcare IoT market, again, massive growth, right? Rising investments into the IoT solutions as well. So not only are we looking at IoT to improve healthcare overall, but IoT, solutions to help with from a security standpoint. And we're still kind of rolling into the why, right? Why is this a concern? Why do we care? Why is this a big deal? Why are we having these conversations? And it's because there's numerous security issues associated with medical devices. These are things that aren't necessarily talked about in news media. These aren't things that are talked about heavily outside of people like Bruce and Travis, outside of clinical engineering and the CISO and IT and IS. I mean, it's not well documented or charted territory. So there are numerous security issues associated with these medical devices. And although this chart may even be a little old and it doesn't reflect everyone's environment, because everyone's environment is going to be different. And that's really why there's cause for concern, because we all have different environments. One of the challenges that we'll identify and discuss is we're not really sure what's in our environment, right? We're not sure how to handle our environment. And if we all have different environments, it's hard to have a programmatic approach to this and be able to replicate across the industry, because from an industry perspective, we're all very different from a delivery model. So what you're seeing here is, everything from weak passwords, lateral movement, outdated firmware. I mentioned outdated software. Even user practice issues, right? So what is the user doing with these devices? And I think Travis can attest to this in many cases, is that our users are finding that these nifty, for lack of a better term, IoT devices, they can get on the internet, they can surf the web, they can, now I can pay bills, I can do things that I probably shouldn't be doing, but I find a way to do that because it's here, it's in front of me, it's user-friendly, it's graphical, it's all there, everything I need to want to experiment and to do these elements. And it's a huge security concern. And reason being is everything else you see on this document or in this pie chart here is, even if we can guide user practices, the things they're going to do open up the door to lateral movement because of outdated software, outdated obsolete applications, things like that we're finding on our medical devices. And mind blown, simple as that. Like we didn't see this. This is elements that we haven't been able to capture up until the last few years. These devices, again, natively come into our organizations in an ad hoc fashion, right? Where there's a clinical need, they're purchased, they come through procurement, we onboard them, and that's kind of where the best practices stops. We don't onboard them properly to embed some security practices, and then we release them out into the organization for clinical use. And I think, Travis and Bruce might talk to this a little bit regarding, well, now we have an understanding of that. We know why, right? We know what needs to be done, and now we can see this stuff, so we can get ahead of it. We have these opportunities to start to identify these security issues prior to purchase, at time of purchase, and then again at time of deployment, and then from a risk man or a life cycle perspective, all the way through the life cycle of that asset, addressing these kinds of security concerns. Oops. All right, so again, why? We're failing to grasp the security risks of our IOMT assets. So risk is always evolving. It's constantly changing. The threat landscape I shared with you at the beginning will change. It will constantly change. We'll have more threat agents, more bad actors, more reasons to do the things these bad actors or these threat agents want to do. And because our devices are so inherently insecure, they have high hack value. They absolutely do, because of their ability, their lack of security capabilities and their lack of security controls around them. They have dependencies and other factors that create not only inherent risk, but I'll call it aggregated and cascading risk. And what I mean by that is, just because we're familiar with an MRI or a CT or an X-ray system, we tend to forget that there may be 10 workstations associated with that. There may be other elements associated with that. So when we talk about lateral movement and we talk about these other assets being associated with that medical device, that's an aggregated risk, and that could be a cascading risk and completely shut down that area of care for your organization. And then understanding the environment of the risk and how to prioritize. I mean, that's what risks are credible. Where do we need to focus? And this is where it starts to get convoluted, a little tricky and challenging, where now that we're getting some tools, we're spending some money, we're starting to understand, well, where do we start? We have so much intel, so much data, so many systems that we don't really, a lot of organizations have a hard time understanding, where do I prioritize? And so rolling into the challenges here before I pass this on to Bruce is recognizing that you are a target. It doesn't matter if you're a rural setting, it doesn't matter if you're in the city, it doesn't matter where you are. I've mentioned you have assets that have a lot of hack value, and for that, you are a target. And a lot of organizations tend to lose focus of a strategic plan, right? You have these elements in place, you're looking at security, but they may tend to not look at IOMT as part of that strategic plan. And that's where we see a lot of challenges and gaps. Treating IOMT or medical device security like a silo, and only an IT or only HTM being healthcare technology management, or what we'll call clinical engineering in this context, like it's only their problem. And it's not only their problem, it's an organizational issue. And then lack of governance and senior leader representation, right? Not having those senior leaders on board. Not, one group can't go silo and make this effort themselves. It has to come from a top-down approach to align with where the organization wants to be and what their priorities are and what their risk appetite is. So with that, I'll pass this on over to Bruce, and he'll give you a little background on Parkland Health and talk more about some of their security challenges.
Thanks, Matt. Before we get into the details of this slide, I wanted to give the audience some context about Parkland Health, so you have an understanding of the size of our enterprise. Parkland Health is a level 1 trauma center that serves as the safety net hospital for Dallas County. Our bed count's about 882 beds, not counting some of the additional COVID adjustments that we've made in areas that we typically don't have beds, but I'm optimistic that will continue to improve over time. But we are an enterprise, so we don't just have the single acute care hospital. We actually have a pretty big footprint throughout Dallas County. We have a significant number of school-based clinics. We've got about 36 community-based primary care facilities. And we're actually in both juvenile and adult correctional health facilities in the county. So from a technology perspective, we've got about 52,000 network connected devices in our enterprise, out of which there's about 18,000 desktops, about 2,500 servers, about 12,000 medical devices, and then the balance is other. And the others, there's a lot of building automation. Our main hospital is pretty pretty new, so it's got a lot of new technology that was baked into it. A lot of our community-based clinics are also brand new construction projects, and so they also have new embedded technologies. And so we're here to talk about the medical devices, but it dovetails into the operational technology out there as well. I think a lot of the challenges we're going to be talking about here, we're going to see in the OT space as well. So a lot of the things that Matt was talking about, Parkland recognized several years ago that this was an issue. And so we brought this to our board of managers. They made it a priority for us. And so then it was like, great, we've got the mandate to move forward. Now what? We rely on organizations like Gartner to really help us give their professional analysis of what they see in the market, what their initial recommendations are, et cetera, except that this space for medical device security is, it was and still is so immature that they really didn't have any data. So we were on our own to do the large majority research. And one of our strategies was to secure a trusted partner to help us with navigating that information void, helping us down select products and ultimately have a bake-off with a finalist and do a final selection. And in fact, First Health is the organization that helped us with that. And then they got the follow-on work to help us deploy and integrate the solution set that we chose. So I think having a tool set agnostic integrator is a pretty important thing from our perspective. We didn't want to have somebody that, you know, I sell Zingbox, and so that's what that's all I know, and that's what I'm going to bring to the table. We wanted somebody that really had experience in delivering medical device technology, regardless of who the vendor was. So I would recommend you at least think about that down your journey. So from a tool selection perspective, you know, strengths and weaknesses of the tools, the history of a lot of these tools really depends. Some of them started out as a Internet of Things. Some of them started out as more of a medical device platform, and they slowly started stepping into the other spaces. So the capabilities tool to tool for medical device security specifically really varied depending on the maturity of the tool and what the tool was originally envisioned to do as far as problem solving the IoT and IoMT space. Some of the other considerations, and I think it's still a consideration, most of these organizations out there are still privately owned, venture capital funded. There's clearly going to be a shakeout in the industry over the next several years. We've already seen Sandbox get acquired. I think Medigate got acquired, but they got acquired by another company who is still being funded via venture capital. So there is some inherent risk in looking at winners and losers and trying to project who's going to still be here 3 to 5 years from now. We did our best to try to reduce that uncertainty, but there's still going to be a percentage of uncertainty that exists. The other big thing when we were looking at tools, and Matt, you could certainly chime in on this, is licensing ambiguity. I mean, there are some that licensed by the endpoint, some that licensed by the number of beds the hospital system had. It didn't seem to be follow any real rhyme or reason or any real consistency how those licensing models evolved. And of course, the big risk and the big concern that we have is 3, 4, 5 years from now, especially as the market starts consolidating, does that licensing model change? And have we committed ourselves to a particular platform that is now going to exponentially rise in cost because of this? So that's something that I would strongly recommend people look at and consider. And if there's ways that you could bake in to any contract that you might sign, some guarantees or some limitations on increases licensing costs year over year, you may want to consider that. The scope of the tool. The one thing that we made extremely clear in this journey is, all things being equal, we want to get a tool that was born and raised and is focused on managing medical devices. And ultimately, that ended up being one of the biggest drivers for making our final decision is what really assisted Travis's team in not doing just their security functions, but also understanding capacity and life cycle management and maintenance and the like. So I'll let Travis talk in depth about that. But we do use Nuvolo, we do use ServiceNow, and so understanding the integrations between those tools into the particular tool set that we chose was an important consideration as well. Alignment with operational processes and teams. Now, Travis's organization does not report into IT. They report into the facilities part of our organization. However, as most of you know, the lines are starting to blur between clinical engineering teams and traditional IT teams. The good news is we've got a very strong partnership with CE, and we partner very, very closely with them. Because I'm responsible for the technology budgets around security for the enterprise, that's why I drove the initiative for the tool selection and the deployment. But Travis is the operational stakeholder here. And depending on how your organization is organized, it may drive some different decisions. The other big known unknown that we were facing is, how do we know what staffing changes are going to be needed or incremental FTEs in order to support the remediation of all the things that we know we're going to find? And we knew we were going to find a lot, but again, there wasn't really any guidance out there. So we've taken sort of a slow roll approach to this. Travis is bringing on a couple of additional FTEs specifically focused on vulnerability remediation or mitigation. And then we're just going to have to reassess to determine, is that enough, given the fact that he's got 12,000 medical devices that he's concerned about. The other thing that we've done, and it really talks about the lack of organizational vulnerability management skills across the board. I know that there's a lot of large enterprises that are struggling to keep up with simple patch cadence. We realized that I'm not going to be able to go and hire an additional 10, 15 folks, being a nonprofit organization. So we chose to go down the route of engaging a third party to perform vulnerability management as a service for us. It's going to allow our teams to be more effective by allowing them to create a risk-based assessment of the vulnerabilities that are found, help us prioritize those things, and then more importantly, provide our teams with very specific mitigation plans for those particular risks, so that essentially they're given an easy button to just go out and execute rather than having to do all those analysis and assessments themselves. In the past, it was, oh, here's a CV you need to take care of, and we throw it over the fence. And that's just not an effective approach to making our operational teams successful. And then one other concern, we just want to make sure that we didn't have significant overlap in any of the other capabilities that we currently have. Unfortunately, because as Matt mentioned, a lot of these tools are starting to blur the lines and starting to go into the IoT, OT space. It's starting to overlap with our standard vulnerability scanners. So not a big concern, because we could carve out the medical devices that we really do want to pay attention to. But it gets back to that licensing thing, right? We've got a vendor that says, well, you're scanning all these other things, you should pay for that. And our answer is, we contracted for medical device security, and we've got another tool that is handling those OT, IoT devices, regardless of the fact that your tool is also seeing it. So those are the considerations that we looked at when we were trying to get our arms wrapped around the market, arms wrapped around the tools, doing the initial assessments, down selecting, bake off, and then final product selection and rollout. So I guess I'll hand it over to Travis at this point, and he can talk to you in depth about some of the challenges he's had operationally.
Okay. So before I dive too deep into this slide here on our operational challenges, I'd like to give just a little bit of a backstory that kind of got us from where we were to where we are today. So back in 2015, Parkland, we built a new hospital, opened the doors in 2015. At our old legacy hospital, we didn't have a whole lot of integrated technology in our department. We were very minimally integrated at that time. And at the time that we were moving over into the new hospital, we were building our new equipment strategy and so on and so forth. We purchased a lot of equipment that had integration capabilities that we previously did not have to go along with that hospital relocation. So when we were moving into our new building, we went from over a period of a couple of years of implementation to a very minimally integrated clinical engineering department to a highly integrated clinical engineering department. So we had a big portion of our technology connected to the hospital network, so we could send and receive information to our EMRs and such. We had a great relationship formed with IT during all that process. We had our BMDI team supporting us and connecting all these devices and getting everything stood up. Well, now in hindsight looking back, we didn't know what we didn't know at the time, right? So we were going through the technology to make things connect and talk and do what we wanted it to do, but cybersecurity was not in the very front of our mind at that time. It was more like, hey, this is cool. We can send this information here automatically. The nurses don't have to chart, so on and so forth. So that's where we were back in 2015. Fast forward a couple of years, cybersecurity was getting more and more heat and more of a topic of conversation. And that's when we did an internal assessment of our current state and determined we had opportunities here and something that we needed to get in front of. And so Bruce spoke to the previous slide very well about the journey to get us from that point to where we are now. Along the time, when we were doing the implementation phase of this technology, shame on us in clinical engineering, we weren't forward thinking enough at that time to say, hey, as we onboard and connect these devices to the network, we need to capture key network information into our CMMS database that is going to be able to associate our inventory with the IT inventory. So IT is going to look at things over the network. It's going to pull a MAC address, can have an IP assigned to it, certain information like that. Well, historically, your status quo clinical engineering or HTM department hasn't captured that information real consistently. Requires manual entry into our maintenance database and inventory management database. So lessons learned, we should have captured that back in the beginning whenever we were ramping up the integration capabilities of our organization. So so that kind of gets me over into the point we're at here for incomplete cyber inventory. We have a maintenance database in our department that we use. We use Nuvolo, and that's where we have our medical device inventory. We track all of our maintenance, all of our preventative maintenance. Everything we do in our department is maintained and documented in that database. That database does not do cybersecurity for us. We went, through the process to procure a technology for cybersecurity. We're currently going through an integration efforts to have our cybersecurity platform communicate effectively with our Nuvolo CMMS database. If we had captured that inventory information, such as our MAC addresses, so on and so forth, IPs, AE titles, that integration would have been a lot more seamless. But now we're running into challenges, making the detected IT inventory off our cybersecurity communicate well with our CMMS database, which is a manually derived inventory. So having those challenges there has led to a couple of other things. So as we, now we're basically operating in two different systems. We have our database management for our medical devices. We have on the other side is our mitigate tool that we use for cybersecurity risk management. So we're taking information from one, plugging it into the other, so we maintain one single maintenance record for each asset. So that's one of our challenges, is getting a good inventory, knowing what devices we have that are inventoried, that are networked and that are not networked. We have roughly 34,000-ish medical devices total, and about 12,000 of those roughly are actually networked. And we have devices creeping in the doors all the time, popping up on the network. So having an effective cybersecurity tool and process in place is helping us get in front of that. So the inventory, it's a work in progress. We're getting there. We're getting where we need to get, but it is something that is to be aware of as you head into this. So in our inventory, we have roughly 3,200 different models of medical equipment. Each one of those models is a different manufacturer. They have different specs, different standards. There is no such thing really as an industry standard for cybersecurity requirements for medical devices. Hopefully one day there will be. We're not at that point currently. Medical device manufacturers, they build their device. Once it's completed and they complete their R&D, they go through the FDA approval process. That process might take a year or two. Well, those in the IT world know that in a year or two down the road, that OS on that system is already out of date by the time it hits the streets. So they get it FDA approved under a certain model, certain revision, certain OS. They go through the process. By the time we get it on our loading dock, ready to install it, it's already out of date. So the medical device vendors, unfortunately, don't do a really good job in general keeping up with vulnerability management of their devices. They depend on us to reach out to them to say, hey, your device that we have running on our network has this detected a vulnerability. What is the recommended fix for it? And 9 times out of 10, they tell you, well, put it behind a firewall, segment, put in microsegmentation. They make recommendations, but they will do anything in the world to avoid having to do a fix on that medical device. They don't keep up with patches like our other, standard IT technology does. Patches are usually not available. We've been finding this out since we've been live. We reach out to the vendor saying, hey, this system here has, a vulnerability ABC, and we'll find out that there isn't many patches produced for that technology for a number of years. And the vendor doesn't always have a solution for us. So we're running into those scenarios where the medical device manufacturers just are not up to date and current with cybersecurity risk management. So that puts a lot of pressure on us because we're caught in the middle of that. We have to maintain and stick with what the manufacturer makes recommendations on, whereas on the other side, we're trying to keep up with modern current IT standards and institutional risks regarding security management. And so we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. But the tools we have implemented, processes we're going through, we're doing the best we can to identify those risks and look for the higher priority. Then we're ranking things out, based on severity and risk, and attacking the highest risks first and mitigate as much as possible as quickly as we can, which gets us kind of into the bullet 3 here, limited resources. So we haven't been tracking medical device risks historically. Historically, the status quo before cybersecurity was a thing, medical devices were treated as a one-off. So they were sort of excluded from the network, and we depended purely on IT's institutional security tools to keep us safe. And so we'd have legacy systems out there, Windows XP and whatnot, Windows 7 floating around the network, and there was no real management being done. Well, once we got the system up and running and we're automatically monitoring and detecting our inventory, it's telling us exactly what we have on the network, what our vulnerabilities are, how high of a risk is it to our organization. And it was astonishing. It was quite eye-opening to see how far behind we've become over the life of our equipment on inventory. So we quickly figured out that, wow, we're going to need more people. This is a lot of work. So now we know what we didn't know about how much work there is out there. Now we're in a position of quantifying that and determining how many resources it's going to require. Do we have to have additional FTEs, additional contracts, consultants? So we're working through all that. And each one of these vulnerabilities, some of them are a simple fix, go up, apply this patch through a thumb drive or whatever, and you're good to go. Other mitigation strategies are more big picture that requires us partnering with our network support team for network configuration changes, things of that sort. So there's not one, there's not a quick, they're not all quick fixes, they're not all big fixes. There's somewhere in the middle is about the average, but no doubt about it, it's going to require significant resources. We're already finding that out. And unfortunately, this is such a new niche to the industry that there's not any really good benchmarking information out there, at least that I've been able to find, to help guide us on that, to what is the appropriate number of engineers or analysts or whatever the case may be. So we're kind of learning and making it up as we go. Okay, that's all I've got on this slide. Okay, so medical device ecosystem is complex. That's kind of I spoke about that just a little bit a while ago. You have, I don't know, we have a couple hundred different manufacturers and 3,200 roughly different models of equipment, different OSs. We have Windows, we have Lotus stuff. We have all kinds of crazy different OSs out there in our medical devices, and they don't keep up with current IT latest and greatest OSs. Each of these systems or medical devices has a unique use case for what it's intended to be used for. Some of the equipment is in use real time 24/7, never comes off the patient care environment. Other devices, gets used for scheduled procedures and comes back off. Well, the large majority of our devices being in use on patients, a lot of it's 24/7, makes it very difficult for us to do any kind of vulnerability scanning, any kind of inventory management, any kind of hands-on validation of the network information off that device. So being a medical device and how it's used in its native environment makes it very difficult in itself for us to manage this. Your desktop PC, a lot of times you can push some patches, have it pop up on your computer screen. Hey, this device is going to reboot in 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. Then eventually it'll reboot on you. Well, unfortunately, we can't do that on medical devices because a lot of these devices are providing direct patient care. We have life-sustaining equipment, things that are used in surgical procedures. We can't force patches onto them via the network, and we can't force updates. Most of this requires us touching the device, applying patches, and doing whatever updates. So first step is getting it off the network. So there's a number of challenges. It's very complicated in managing a medical device inventory. A lot of our devices is unable to update. Like I said before, manufacturers oftentimes don't have patches available to us. They'll give us some kind of generic or vague risk mitigation strategy that they'll recommend, if anything. Our legacy systems, you can buy brand new state-of-the-art diagnostic imaging systems that will come to you with an out-of-support OS on it. And I'm not sure the rationale, and I wouldn't want to speak, on behalf of the manufacturers, but it happens all the time. We buy a brand new couple $1 million imaging system, CT scanner or something, and it'll arrive and we'll install it with an out-of-date OS. So that's very normal to us. Medigate gives us our tools and our cybersecurity platforms, such as Medigate, will identify those OSs and give you a risk criteria for those out-of-date OS operating systems, and basically gives you the information you need to manage it. Knowing that we can't go in and effectively upgrade every computer on our network and get it to the latest Windows 10, at least we have the tools and the information and the visibility to identify those devices and effectively mitigate the risk to the best of our ability with the tools we have in place. Over here in insufficient visibility, that's a good point based on the medical device inventory that we have. So Medigate, or our cybersecurity platform, provides an automatic scanned inventory. If it takes it on the network, it tells us what we got. And then we're also managing it out of our Nivolo database for our hands-on inventory. We have, issues in reconciling that. Sometimes devices will come online, then go back offline, and that creates some inventory issues, discrepancies, so on and so forth. So there's just some other challenges that we run into. Proprietary networks, proprietary protocols. We are getting away from that, so we're getting better about that. Historically, a lot of our clinical engineering devices have their own proprietary network. You buy an EEG system from Neon Coden, they're running on their own network that's not part of the organizational network. But we have fortunately migrated away from that in our new hospital. But that still exists. That's still out there pretty frequently, where you have a proprietary network that you're stuck dealing with the medical device manufacturer for support rather than your IT department. So that's all I have on this slide. Parkland overcoming medical device security challenges. So a lot of what we've done, we kind of talked about this already. Identifying the problems that we've had was done for us a lot through our Mitigate platform. Leaning on basically when we started going down this path in 2017-ish, when we started realizing what was out there, we're starting to learn what we didn't know about it, right? And the market was very mature, as Bruce spoke to earlier. There was a number of vendors out there, all having a very different strategy or technique for how they're going to do what they do. And that was the initial. And then as time went on and we started evaluating some of these vendors, their strategies were changing, their technology was changing, the tools they were providing were changing. So that was another one of the challenges that we ran into. Engaging a implementation expert such as First Health, that was key to getting us to where we are today. Because those guys have a much broader spectrum. They have a lot of visibility into the market. Bringing them on board to help guide us through this process was instrumental in us getting to where we're at. Identifying the issues, what they may impact. The cybersecurity program that we're implementing, it grabs the information off the network for us. It tells us right there, part of our subscription service provides risk mitigation. It tells you what the vulnerability is, what the device is that is affected, and by the way, here's what you do to mitigate it. And it provides that information. And then at some point we have to reach out to the medical device manufacturer and get their feedback on what we need to do for next steps. Engaging the right stakeholders. This has been very eye-opening to us. This has led to a lot of collaboration between our clinical engineering department and our partners over in IT. IT's got a number of stakeholder teams that are, depending on what type of technology we're talking about, is who has to be at the table. So this has been a pretty key driving factor in collaboration between our department and our IT department. Change management program, something we're working on right now on how when we do detect a vulnerability, we got to make changes either in the network or on the medical devices, how we document that, have the stakeholders involved and make decisions that will not have downstream negative impacts. We're working on our integration tools now. We're trying to get our database talking to Nivolo, Nivolo talking over to Mitigate. And the more we can integrate that, we can better streamline that inventory and information. So we should be good there. And that's all I got on the slide.
All right, so kind of rolling back to the how. So I think these guys hit on it pretty well with their challenges. They're overcoming the challenges, and that kind of rolls into this how part. So, understanding the communication path. So I think we've identified, Bruce, Travis, separate departments, but same mission, same vision, same place they want to go with this program. And that's exactly what this is communicating that out to the stakeholders. Here's the challenge. Here's how we're going to overcome this challenge. They've hit this as well, hire talent that's done this before. This is a massive undertaking, and it's a lot of hours, it's a lot of program management, it's a lot of PMing, and it can be overwhelming if you've never attempted some of these elements. So coming to having a partner become involved with your vision and mission and deployment of these tools and creating a program is a critical element. Education. I think we've had these conversations that it requires some people who have a designated background in understanding security, medical devices, risk, governance, all of it. And so it doesn't always exist within one organization who knows everything about everything. It's hard. So when you engage with some talent externally with advisory firms, you get that multidisciplinary approach. You get multiple people from different backgrounds who can bring to fruition the program elements that they've been discussing. We've talked about tools all along, utilizing existing controls. What do you have? How can we integrate? How can we, without spending any more money, what do we have in the environment and how can we utilize that? My background is again, looking at the enterprise tools, the network access controller, any kind of, name brand tools that the enterprise, the network team, the security team would use. And how do we orchestrate all this, right? There's no rhyme or reason why we can't put all these tools together, have a single source of truth, and start to have playbooks, run books, start to have, a fully integrated process from onboarding to what do we do when we have an incident. Metrics are key. Where do we stand today? Where are we going with this? How do we get there? How do we know we've achieved any milestones? Partnerships, Bruce nailed it, right? If they're going to go buy a product, you don't want a one and done. You don't want the product to just be installed and goodbye and good luck. It's a matter of, I want my partners or my vendors to be my partner. As things come about, if there's new services, if there's new elements to the product, share it with me. I want to beta it, or I want to check it out, or communicate, work with me. And that's how we kind of create that lasting partnership. We talked about a little bit about life cycle within your IoT environment. Again, start to finish, onboarding to almost end of life with sanitization and all processes in between. The governance structure, so working groups, core committees, and policies and procedures around these. So how? Kind of the pyramid here of what we've been discussing. And again, we've captured a lot of this. But what I really focus on here is that core strategies. What does it really take for medical device security? How do we really move that needle? And we've covered this, right, with governance and steering committees, core working groups to come together, have some support, and here's the mission and vision of the organization. Here's what we want to accomplish. And that allows for you to justify, additional funding, additional FTEs, additional things, because you're trying to accomplish this mission and vision of those senior leaders and stakeholders. So now you have to bring to the table, evidence. Why do I need FTEs? Why do I need this? And I think Travis nailed it too with, well, we've got some tools. We're seeing how the level of effort is pretty significant. And if we actually want to reduce risk to within the appetite, this is what we need. And here's why. So having that evidence for you. Stop the bleeding, proper onboarding, device hardening, creating those secure config baselines. We hit at the beginning. There is no standard image. These are not IT devices. They require massaging essentially from the time you open the box to the time these are end of life and you're disposing of them. Challenging but important and time consuming. The upper half of this is very important and significant, but as we'll see, it's we got to touch every single device. We have to identify the information within to be able to do this, and it is an organized effort amongst multiple stakeholders, multiple teams, and so it becomes a little more challenging. So just having a risk management approach to this, we've hit on this several times. This is never a one and done. You don't just look at a device, do a risk assessment, all right, off we go. We're done with that device. No, it's a program, it's a strategy. You have to identify the risk, constantly do assessments, understand what vulnerabilities are associated with that. How does that impact risk? What controls are we going to apply? How do we report on those? Who's going to own those? And kind of make that an iterative process year after year. And when you have the tools, you have the processes, you have the people in place, it becomes a little bit easier. And again, the level of effort is significantly reduced over time. It becomes scalable as well once you identify, the amount of make and models that you have within your organization. Just high level, I don't want to dive too deep into this, but it's assessing risk, utilizing the tools that Bruce and Travis have identified and discussed. These tools provide this information here. This allows you to, confidently come up with a comprehensive risk assessment to understand where do you focus your efforts, how do you focus your efforts, and really why would you focus your efforts? Because it provides you the intel that we've never had up until the last several years to be able to make these risk-informed decisions. I guess the real critical one that I like to share here is define asset criticality and sensitivity. Right? Where do you start? I mean, in understanding what you have in your org, you can't just start at the bottom line. You can't just start with a particular asset. There's a reason why you start with certain assets, right? Which ones are most critical for the mission and vision of your org? Which ones could possibly put you on diversion? If you've only got 3 of them, they're all the same, and there's a potential that they could go down. Evaluating that criteria from a business impact analysis perspective is a good place to start. We've mentioned how, right, vulnerabilities, we've been talking about that throughout. So filter out the noise, get to the nuts and bolts. What's important? How do I sift through this? And we've talked about, utilizing third parties for vulnerability as a service to kind of profile that, to start sifting through that, peel off what's not relevant and focus on what is. I've already nailed on business criticality, right? So looking at those assets that are mission critical to the organization. And patient safety for sure, right? Is there a possibility of a sentinel event with a patient if there's a discrepancy with a device, or if a device is hacked or whatnot? How do you, understanding that and putting that into your risk assessment process is how you kind of start with this program. And then kind of high level, some of the benefits here is the tools. They do many attributes for you. So device tracking, your data flow analysis, behavioral insights, exactly what is happening in your environment, who, what, when, where, and why is all available to you with some of the tool sets that have been identified. Problem is there's so much overwhelming data. How do you, and what do you do with that data? So again, identifying where do we put this data? How do we start to build workflows and processes around it? And then you get to these real benefits. Now the tool starts to be, you start to show some ROI on these tools that you're paying for. You track devices. So Travis's team, his level of effort can be significantly reduced if he can start to find exactly where devices are with these kinds of technologies without the use of something like RTLS, because the way these devices are communicating and behaving, it can be tracked down to their specific location. And that's where the insights come in. Are they only calling home? Are they getting online? Are they making certain decisions on their own? What is happening with these devices? I've mentioned at the very beginning, natively out of the box, they're released. They don't have any inherent controls enabled in most cases. So the behaviors of them can be anywhere from again, surfing the internet to doing things they shouldn't be doing, and allowing clinicians to be able to utilize them as more than just a medical device. All right, running out of time here, but capital planning, operational efficiencies, and vendor management and risk management, really that's the core for some of these benefits. Understanding how do I do technology refreshes, how do I associate vulnerabilities and risk with my medical devices to help me capitalize or help me look at capital replacement decisions around the data. And again, Travis mentioned some tools that Parkland has that can really help with these kinds of planning. So he mentioned he's got some outdated operating systems and multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment. Let's make some decisions around that. How do we support that? How do we look at not buying those kinds of devices and enforcing specific rules around what we're going to buy based on the data that we're seeing within our organization? Okay, so I'll round out, kind of end it here with any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of the information. This was great to learn about your journey. So I do have a couple questions for you. I do want to get to it. I know some people are probably going to start jumping off, but I at least want to get to these. So do you see a need to develop a mutually agreed national healthcare specific security standard for IOMT devices?
I'll take that one. It would be nice. I definitely think it would be very beneficial to all of us in this industry, in IT and in clinical engineering and healthcare in general. It's a need. It's something that's not there currently. Not having those standards set for the medical device manufacturers really puts us in a pinch. So I feel like it should happen. I don't know how to get it started, but yeah.
Okay, good. And then I have 2 more questions for you, and we can wrap this up. But do you think executive leadership in healthcare understands the need to increase spend on cybersecurity and physical security going forward?
I believe so. Speaking for our organization here, there's been a lot of money invested in cybersecurity. Bruce probably has more knowledge on that than I do, but there has been a significant investment made because our organization is aware of the risks involved, and a little bit of money spent on risk prevention will save a lot in the long run.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that being aware, getting the data to the right executive leadership and educating them is really key in this. But it does start with folks like myself and the CIO and for them to understand the significance of the threat landscape that continually evolves and continually targets hospital systems, and using that data that's really available out there publicly. Plus I get a lot of the intelligence and threat feeds from the various federal government agencies. Taking that and really getting your C-suite and your board of managers on board is critical to getting the kind of funding and the kind of support that you're ultimately going to need to be successful in this space.
Okay. Another question, are there any national standards in process in this area today?
No, not so much.
believe
Sorry, go ahead. No real national standards, right? So we look, and many of the programmatic elements that we've been discussing and some of the challenges and everything that we've been talking about is we look to framework, so like the NIST cybersecurity framework, to help kind of frame that up and shape what a program would look like, utilizing different controls, even the CIS-20, to make sure controls are applicable. But national standards, not currently. There's numerous working groups out there that are trying to identify ways to aggregate the information, aggregate the data, hold vendors and OEMs accountable. But the movement and the process is extremely slow. I think, you know, we're in that prime of awareness. And now we're all trying to aggregate together and moving forward and hiring and getting the right people in front of the major stakeholders to move towards something like a standard, but not currently.
Yeah. Well, so the questions just keep coming. I'm sorry. I think it's triggering people's brains of all of the information that you provided today. So I'm going to get to, do you think that other industries such as finance and banking can currently have mutually agreed national security standards that maybe healthcare could potentially reference?
So I think that until we get the medical device manufacturers incentivized to take this seriously and start baking in these kinds of more mature traditional IT type processes, I don't see much progress. I will tell you that John Rigi with the American Hospital Association is constantly testifying in front of Congress on the behalf of hospital systems to try to get them to understand, in particular this space, that we need national standards. And so he's really trying to push Congress to get some legislation on the table to accomplish that. You know, getting direct feedback from him, there seems to be incremental progress, and the education aspect of that is ongoing. So I'm optimistic that something should happen in the next couple of years, but we'll see.
Good. Good. That is all that we have today. And on behalf of the Arizona HIMSS chapter, I'd like to thank, you know, Bruce, Travis, Matt for all of the information and obviously taking the time to, you know, do this presentation for our community here in Arizona. So again, thank you so much. For those of you that are still on, we will have a link. The link actually gets generated once the video gets uploaded. So we will have that and send out a link. We do have email addresses for those who joined that we can send that out to. If not, you can just reach out to us on our website, on our new portal. You can ask the questions. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate all of the information, and it sounds like you guys have done a really good job at navigating through this process. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.